evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second half of our congressional debate, sponsored by the Billings Gazette. Many of you were here earlier this evening for the first half of the debate. For those of you who weren't, I'd like to make a couple of introductions. Our moderator this evening will be Dan Dubray, who is Executive Director of Community 7 TV in Billings. And Community 7 is broadcasting this debate, both of these debates this evening, and as well as C-SPAN through a feed from Community 7. We also have CBS National News here covering it this evening. On my left is our panel of questioners. And once again, for those of you who were here earlier, I hate to be repetitive, but for those of you who weren't, I'd like to introduce the following. To my left is Charles Johnson, known to us as Chuck Johnson. He is a veteran reporter from Helena. He is the chief of the Lee State Bureau in Helena and serves the 4 Lee newspapers. To Chuck's left is Sherry Devlin, who is an environmental issues reporter for the Missoulian. And to Sherry's left is Perry Backus, who is a Dillon Bureau reporter for the Montana Standard in Butte. And at the far end of the table is Jackie Yamanaka, who is news director for public radio KEMC and KBMC FM. And over here to my right, we have a man who probably does not need any introduction. I'm sure both of them don't tonight. We have our incumbent U.S. Senator, Republican, Conrad Burns.
Hometown.
And to Conrad's right is Democrat Jack Mudd. On behalf of the Billings Gazette, I would like to hope that tonight is a fruitful, rewarding night for all of you, and that you take with you tonight some views of the candidates and make intelligent votes on November 8th. And without further ado, I'll bring Dan Dubray to the microphone. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. The rules this evening are simple. With the flip of a coin, Conrad Burns will make opening remarks first this evening. Jack Mudd will follow him, and the order will be reversed for summation at the end of tonight's debate. The first question will also be for Conrad Burns, and it will come from Chuck Johnson. So to explain the rules this evening, the person asked the question gets 2 minutes to respond. Rebuttal is 1 minute. We fixed our light this evening, so we have a red light down here, gentlemen. We'll flash it with 15 seconds remaining as a courtesy in your time, and it'll be on solid when your time has expired. So the first, we should also point out that if in rebuttal a candidate asks the other a question, the candidate asked the question gets an opportunity to respond, also 1 minute. Those are the ground rules this evening, so we begin with opening remarks from Conrad Burns.
Thank you very much, and good evening. And I want to thank the Gazette or the Lee papers for sponsoring this event. And I want to welcome Jack Mudd to my hometown of Billings, Montana. This campaign is getting down to the final days, the closing days. And when we come before a group, come before a nation, what should we be discussing? What should we be talking about in this debate? First of all, we have to talk about Montana. Montana's #1 industry, by far and away, is agriculture. It's going to be pretty important because in 1995, we're going to rewrite a new farm bill. Food policy, our ability to this nation to feed and clothe itself, provides shelter for its citizens. But in agriculture, just like anything else, it is a constant educational chore. Because what we find in America are folks who are, by vast amounts, second, third, and fourth generations off of the land. They only do business with the front end of the grocery store. Know very little about the back end. How broad are our shoulders of our producers of food and fiber? How do we improve farm income? Because that dollar in our community turns over 7 times. Tourism. The next new dollar producer in Montana. New technologies, the new route to the world. The national debt. Reduced? No. Taxes, health care, natural resources, and this administration. That should be the subject of this discussion.
Second remarks from Jack Mudd, 2 minutes.
I want to thank the Gazette and Lee newspapers and all of you for coming. This is what I wanted to do from the beginning. Last September, I asked Senator Burns if we could please limit the money in this campaign and get out and talk with the people 30, 40 times, if possible, like our gubernatorial candidates did last year. This is what it should be about, not about big media campaigns. And I'm glad you're here. I'm disappointed, though, for hundreds, perhaps thousands of Montanans who will not be able to see this debate, because I learned today that Senator Burns' campaign has said that he will no longer be available after Thursday for any more televised debates. I'm sorry about that, and I hope we can change his mind. Each night in Montana, 100,000 people go to bed without health insurance. I think that's a problem, and I think it should be changed. Conrad Burns has said that most of the people who don't have health insurance don't want it. I think that this campaign should not be about big money. 6 years ago, Senator Burns, then candidate Burns, criticized his opponent for spending all of $1 million on a Senate campaign. Now he'll spend $3 million. And he said he will spend, quote, whatever it takes to win. I think that's wrong, and I think it should be changed. I think that lobbyists have too much influence over our government. They'll always be there. They've been there in the past, but too much influence. 6 years ago, candidate Burns criticized his opponent for taking 3 lobbyist-paid trips to a foreign country. He has taken 60. Many of them paid vacations, and the others to collect fat speaking fees totaling over $100,000. I think that's wrong, and I think it should be changed. We cannot have the government that we want until we change our politics. Here tonight is a first step. Thank you very much.
To begin our questioning this evening, Chuck Johnson leads off the questioning this evening. His question is for Conrad Burns.
Senator Burns, as you have done in the past, you recently repeated a racial slur that embarrassed Montana before the country. And your bus tour seems to be stopping everywhere in Montana except on Indian reservations. If you are reelected, what specific actions will you pledge to take in the next session of Congress to help the plight of minorities and to improve race relations in Montana and America?
First of all, I shouldn't have repeated the story, and I apologized. That's about all that I can do. We will visit every Indian reservation that we can get to next week. That's been on the books a long time. They are special folks. We have tried to serve them in a very special way because they have very special needs. We have a special person on our staff that just works with affairs on the reservations. I think it's pretty noble that we get that person on those reservations, and I very seldom ever go through a county that has a reservation in it and not visit my Native American friends. We have lots of folks working in this campaign. I'm very proud of that.
Can you tell us what you do next session of Congress to improve the plight of minorities and improve race relations in America?
We have to live by example. It's not what we, it's not, it's what we do. It's what we do. And how we deal with those people. And I mean just in all people. Not those, but mine too. I shouldn't have repeated the story. I'm heartily sorry for it, and I apologize. And I shall continue to work in the same vein as I have in my 6 years record, and my voting record will hold up under that.
1 minute rebuttal from Jack Mudd.
"30 years ago, I was a student in Washington, D.C., and I was standing with a black student and a Jewish student and myself in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And a member of the American Nazi Party came in front of us and uttered words that I won't repeat here, but I can never repeat words of that kind. That same 30 years ago, the civil rights legislation was being debated, and that floor debate was being led by our U.S. Senator, Mike Mansfield, who was the longest standing majority leader in the history of this country. He was leading the civil rights movement. And now today we are saddened when we read in the Washington Post and the New York Times about Senator Burns' comment. And I have to say, Senator Burns, we are tired of apologizing for your conduct.
We're going to enjoy the exchange this evening. We hope that we can have time for all the questions. The next one is from Sherry Devlin. It is for Jack Mudd.
Jack, your opponent likes to remind voters that you are a liberal lawyer from Missoula. In a state as diverse politically as ours is, what representation do you offer Montanans that we don't already have in a liberal lawyer from Missoula named Max Baucus?
Senator Burns is very good with slogans, but let me say something that he's not telling you. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm a family man. I spent more time in eastern and central Montana than he has. I grew up here. I grew up in Glasgow. I've lived in Great Falls. I've lived in Butte. I have lived in eastern Montana, central Montana, and western Montana. This is my state. We've been here for over 100 years, 5 generations, and I can represent the state. I have also been in education. So I will not apologize for where I have been, and my politics you will have to listen to. It's very easy to dismiss people as liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat. The debate tonight is not about labels, it's about hearing the viewpoints. And that's what we want to do. After the debate, you can decide, and all of us in Montana will decide, can this person represent me? Will this person look out for agriculture? Will this person look out for the property rights of folks in eastern Montana? Does this person understand timber and mining? Does this person understand health care? That's what this is about, and that's what the debate should be about.
Conrad Burns, you have 1 minute.
A while ago, my opponent was talking about the ability to raise money. It was his colleague, that Senator Baucus, that set the standard. Raised over $3 million, spent it. This state is my home too, by choice. come back here. So when we take a look at things, and this whole campaign has not been on the issues. He goes off on this treadmill of not talking about the issues. And if you're on the wrong side of the issues, you have a hard time talking about them. Where should we be? Do we think alike as far as natural resources or agriculture? I don't think we do. Let's talk about those issues. The representation. Maybe another viewpoint. Special interest. Special interest are those who support my opponent. Let's get real about politics. Let's get real and talk the issues.
The next question is for Senator Burns. It's from Perry Backus.
Senator Burns, there are about 28 million acres of federal lands managed by the Forest Service and BLM in Montana. Recently, you were quoted as saying, "The government has no business in the land business." If that's so, what are your alternatives?
It's a good question. If we take the government and take a look at Yellowstone Park, and you take a look at range conditions in Yellowstone Park, and you would be appalled. Too much livestock, overgrazed, and overworked. Roads that are going out that you can't even get around the park, infrastructure falling apart, can't even house the people that work there. We have to take a realistic look at land and resources. For if we can manage one section for, say, wilderness or a single use, then we have to designate multiple use and allow the land managers to manage it. Now, I agree. We have to take these little blocks of BLM and the sections that are out there by themselves in the middle of a ranch, let's make a trade or let's sell the land, because realistically, we can't manage it as a government. We can't do it. But if we can designate single use, then we can designate multiple use. That ensures everybody at least a living, an economic future, some predictability and stability to the smaller communities that depend on public lands. And we can manage that multiple use with common sense and the right approach with a lot of groups. Down in your part of the country, we have a little thing called the fleecer. We have a little thing called Wall Creek, where all the groups come together, the environmental groups, the state and federal land managers, the state fish and game and the U.S. fish and game. And you know what? We worked out a way down there that we can still graze, we can rotate pastures, we supply winter range for elk, and we've got more elk, deer, whitetail, and more wildlife now than any time in the history of this country. That's what we have to do, and take the models of the fleecer and the Wall Creek and promote those kind of units.
Jack Mudd, your rebuttal.
With the amount of federal acreage that we have in Montana under federal land management, it's critical that we stand up to the federal government and say no when they want to foul things up. I think, for example, that the way the grazing reform was attempted to be crammed down our throats in Montana was wrong. And 2 weeks ago, I told Secretary Babbitt that. That's not the way we want to have it done here. Our people have been on this land for hundreds of years, and we know how to manage it. And that's part of what we have to do in land management. Bring people together, the conservation groups, the ranchers, the sportsmen, and decide how best we can handle the management of this land. One of the things that Conrad Burns and I disagree about is that in the bill that he proposed, which fortunately was dead on arrival when it was passed, he would not have followed multiple use in that bill. It would have been a priority use for extractive industries and would have changed for Montana the land management under which every other block of federal land is managed in this country. I think that's wrong. I believe in multiple use management.
The last question from our panel in this round is from Jackie Yamanaka. It's for Jack Mudd.
Mr. Mudd, Montana's congressional delegation has brought home, among other things, $5.5 million for housing projects, $7.5 million for environmental research, about $5 million for a Hungry Horse Dam project, $500,000 for Small Business Center at Montana State University, $11.5 million for defense projects. The President said today the budget deficit is still over $200 billion. If elected to the U.S. Senate, are you going to join the race to snatch more pork for Montana? And if so, what specific programs are you willing to cut to afford this type of spending?
First of all, we have to reduce the deficit, and I've identified programs that I think ought to go. For example, I don't think it makes sense for us to be looking at a $454 billion space program today. I think some of the weapons systems that we have need to be frozen. I've also identified other programs that I think we should cut. In Montana, we have a very small amount of federal dollars coming in here, apart from our highway dollars. I have supported the reduction of the federal government under the last budget by 272,000 people, and Montana should take its share of those cuts, like every other state. If we have a particular program that is housed here, and that program is not high priority, then that needs to be cut along with every other program. But in Montana, what we find is we don't have a whole lot of programs that are called pork. Is Malmstrom pork? No. Are some of the other research programs that are being conducted all over the country? I don't think so. Are certain water projects pork? I don't think so. The question is high priority programs. If the United States votes for high priority programs, and some of them are located here, then I will fight for those programs as a U.S. Senator from Montana. But as a U.S. Senator, if we have low priority programs, whether they're defense programs, domestic programs, then I think we have to cut those. Because what we can't continue to do is have a credit card mentality where we're driving up the federal deficit and buying things that we want now, even things that may be good, with our children's money, and asking them to pay for it plus the interest on it. I think that's wrong.
Ask where you would cut, how to get the deficit under control. I believe in a line item veto. I believe in a balanced budget amendment. And when you look at that, there are certain things that do have to be cut. Money has to be moved around. There's only one thing that'll force it. We have to pass some kind of a bill that says you can only grow 4% or 5%, whichever the figures are. Every year let government grow based on previous year's expenditures. We have got to trash baseline budgeting, or you'll never get this budget under control or the spenders. Does he have a program? No, he does not. He does not. He's just going to pick something that he likes. If he wants to cut the defense budget, he said the other day, cut the defense budget. Any more cuts in defense budget, and Malmstrom is gone.
That completes what we call round one, and now we start our questioning again, this time with Sherry Devlin, who has a question for Conrad Burns.
Conrad, you promised Montana voters 6 years ago that you would, if elected, pass a Montana wilderness bill within a year. 6 years have now passed, and rather than end the wilderness debate, you have introduced an industry-written bill that has left the issue more polarized than ever before. How do you reconcile your actions with the promise you made the people of this state in 1988?
If there's one thing that Montana believes in, it's fair. I think all Montanans believe in fair. What did my bill do? It dealt with all the acres. It said, the land managers recommended 800,000 acres in wilderness. Fine, let's designate them where they wanted them, maybe a little more than they wanted. But in those acres released, we're going to designate multiple use. Not for extractive. We're not going to circumvent any of the laws of NEPA, the Forest Management Act, none of them. We are going to manage these acres for multiple use, because I happen to believe that the communities of Fort Tyne and Darby and Troy deserve the stability and the predictability for their own economy and their own society. And yet you've got people that will come in from out of state and say, those people don't count. Now, if you don't deal with all the acres and say you pass one and there's no compromise on water, that belongs to Montana. It's always been a states' rights issue. It shall always be a states' rights issue. But what we've got to do is give them those communities some predictability. Don't let anybody glaze your. And I'm not real sure the next makeup in the Congress next time might be conducive to passing that. But you've got to deal with all the acres. If you do not, the signature on that bill, if you accept no matter what, the signature on that bill will not be dry, and there'll be another wilderness bill, and another, and another. That the debate will never, never go away. What I want to do is settle the issue. We thought we had it settled once, and there was a lot of funny things happen. And I learned a lot about character and integrity and your word in that debate. I don't want to go through that anymore. I want to deal with all the acres now and give these people that live in western Montana, where 46% of the industry, of the economy in western Montana is dependent on the wood products. It's only fair, and Montanans understand fair.
Next question is for Jack Mudd. It's from Perry Backus. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Sir.
I happen to disagree with Senator Burns' bill that he calls the jobs bill for several reasons. Number one, it's not going anyplace. He hasn't even asked for hearings on it. He introduced it 6 months before the end of the session. It's dead on arrival. Number two, although he says that he believes in multiple use, that bill would change the multiple use laws in this country for the lands released in Montana and place on those lands a priority for timber harvest, mining, and oil and gas development. That is in the bill. Now, while I think that we ought to have those things in areas where they're appropriate, I do not think that they should be a priority use over wildlife, hunting, fishing, and other kinds of uses. I believe in multiple use. But even if you thought that this bill was going to be the best bill that came down the pike, why did it take 5.5 years to put it in the hopper? The fact is that Senator Burns 2 years ago signed on to a compromise bill, and then he did an about-face on that and introduced this bill. If this bill is so good, it should have been introduced and debated not 6 months before the session ended, but 6 months after he arrived and after he promised.
Now Perry Backus has his question for Jack Mudd.
Mr. Mudd, given that federal spending will be reduced when it comes time to consider the 1995 Farm Bill, what 3 to 5 specific elements must be included in the new Farm Bill to garner your support?
The 1995 Farm Bill is going to be one of the most important pieces of legislation for Montana because a third of the economy of this state depends upon what happens in that Farm Bill, at least a third. What I think has to happen is that we've got to set a loan price that will be realistic and that the market will follow. I happen to believe that CRP is important, the concept. We can tinker with it, we can adjust it, but the concept of setting land aside and making sure that we do not abuse the land is important. I think there are other things that we can do, at least that we should look at, that will try to that get this system closer to a market level. All our farmers want is not to be wealthy. They want two things. They want to make a decent living to get a fair return on their investment, and they want to be able to pass the farm and ranch on to the next generation. Our inheritance taxes need to make that happen. We cannot have our farms carved up, as they have been in the past, to pay taxes to the federal government, because it's not just an economic issue that's been divided, it's a family and social issue. I think there are changes in the tax code that need to happen, whether it's capital gains treatment that favors farm and ranch families, income averaging, to make sure that they have an opportunity to level out the swings, the ups and downs in their income. All those things need to happen, and we have to make sure, and I think this is the critical part for Montana, as you point out, with the charges on the budget, with the kinds of things that are going to be cut, we have absolutely got to make sure that we stand up in this part of the country and say, America, if you want safe, dependable, regular, fair-priced food, there is a price to be paid for that, and that price isn't a subsidy to the farmers. It's something that we all pay for something that we get a benefit out of, and we have to understand that.
Jack's learning.
You're darn right I am.
You bet. But that's what I said about agriculture. It's a continuous educating thing. I mean, when I said, how are we going to improve farm income? Heard it right there. Most of it, we got to make sure that this bill is written by farmers and for farmers and ranchers. There has to be property rights involved. There has to be some way, and yes, over on the grain side, is to let us market against foreign governments. The individual farmers, we can market the product we got, we can produce it now. And we got to have three things, and I'll tell you what they are. We need a capital gains cut, so because these farms aren't moving into young farmers' hands. It's the only way we can do it. And they call it, his administration calls it the rich man's tax. It's not, it's a voluntary tax. If you don't want to pay it, you don't sell, and they're not selling. Income averaging, that's a long time ago. Not a new idea. And investment credit, accelerated. Let them buy new tractors. And you know what that does? That really helps Billings, Montana, too, and Great Falls, Montana, and Missoula, Montana.
Conrad Burns has a question from Jackie Yamanaka.
Senator, you're for a balanced budget amendment, and you say you voted against every tax proposal that's come before you. So in order to reduce a budget deficit, that means further cuts in government. So what three programs do you favor? Programs that your constituents also favor. Are you willing to cut to reduce the federal budget deficit?
You don't have to cut programs. I'll tell you, it's very simple. In fact, the idea is so simple, I couldn't get anybody to buy it. Because in Washington, everything has to be complicated. There has to be more to it. I call it the 4% solution. Jackie, it's a wonderful question, and I just want to deal with it. And I'll tell you what it would force us to do. What I'm saying is get rid of baseline budgeting. I could stand here and try to explain to you baseline budgeting, and you would leave here just talking to yourself. What we have to do is start zero budgeting. Other words, in 1990, when I introduced my 4% solution, if you could only allow the government to grow 4% a year based on previous year's expenditures, not the previous year's budget, expenditures. Then in 5 years, we could have balanced the budget, and then we could have started working on the national debt. It was a very simple idea, very simple. And then what would that force us to do? If we need more money over here, then we have to do away with programs over here that are not working. They are old and they're wore out, and we shift that money. But the umbrella says you're not going to spend any more than 4% based on previous year's expenditures. That's fiscal responsibility. So you can say, yes, I support a balanced budget amendment, but it's also got to have a program to go with it. You have to have a program to go with it. I will say some of that 4% solution was injected into the last budget. We will keep hammering on this, keep hammering on it until we get it through. It's wonderful to come from county government where you had to balance the budget. You balanced the budget, you appropriated the money, and you spent the money. Just 3 of us in the county. We had very few problems. But we also had a law that says you can't go over your budget.
First of all, it's not accurate to say that Conrad Burns never voted for any tax increases. He supported the Dole alternative to the budget that had in it $14 billion of what was called then user fees. In Montana, we call those taxes. And that same budget had, as part of the balance to it, and this comes from the minority report, the one that he signed on to, cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, foster care, railroad retirement, farm price supports that we were just talking about, veterans compensation benefits, and others. Now, Conrad Burns, I'm able to ask you a question. Isn't it a fact that you signed on to the Dole budget reconciliation, the alternative budget to President Clinton's budget?
I did.
Thank you.
Can I answer that now?
Sure.
Yes.
Huh? I did. But you know what? That never made it to the floor.
Just doesn't get it.
That's right. It didn't make it to the floor. And 40 is still being better than 0-1 in a gunfight. I will stand by the record of 0-40. I will stand by that record because when you vote on final passage or on the floor, that's shooting with real bullets. That's what we do there. That's what we do there. So I'll take it. My record.
All right, will the gentleman yield? Thank you.
Do I get a minute response on that?
The way it is if you
Okay.
ask the question, he gets to respond. And if he does that to you, you'll have that opportunity. Next, to get us back on track, is a question for Jack Mudd from Chuck Johnson.
Mr. Mudd, when you announced your candidacy last year, you promised a change from politics as usual. You were quoted as saying, quote, "It's politics as usual to throw rocks. It's politics of the future to offer alternatives and stick your own neck out on the line," unquote. What happened to your promise? You seem to be doing what other politicians are doing, running 30-second TV ads throwing rocks at your opponent. Why don't you quit throwing rocks and tell us what Jack Mudd's vision for the future is?
Part of my vision for the future is not taking junkets. Part of my vision for the future is standing by your word and not saying you're not going to have a pay raise and then take one. I think that's a real issue. Now, part of what I think needs to be done away with politics as usual, when you say you vote for a budget before it hits the floor, and then you can go and say you vote against it then, and then you can turn around and say, well, I never voted for a tax increase. We call that flim-flam. To say that you're not against cuts in Medicare and then support $150 billion of cuts in Medicare, I think is flim-flam. The problem with this campaign, when we started to go on the road of saying it's a $3 million campaign, Senator Burns started in June running negative commercials against me, saying, for one thing, Jack Mudd refuses to debate me. I couldn't believe it, so I pulled out the correspondence and I said, did I really read this properly? And I showed that last September I had agreed to debate him. What I'm faced with, frankly, is the biggest negative campaign run in the history of Montana politics. I have run 3 ads. I have run 3 ads that say something about what I think needs to be changed. I think this trip business is wrong. I think taking a pay raise when you said you weren't going to take one is wrong. And I think, as the Billings Gazette said, Conrad Burns is too close to lobbyists. I think all of those are issues. One minute, sir.
When you're on the wrong side of the issues, you talk about something else. He's made a pattern of this. Did he go to Chicago because he wanted to go to Chicago? No, he went to Chicago and let the president raise him some money. Shame on you, Jack. You went up there and you got a little special interest, just like I said a while ago. You took a trip to Chicago, one to California, one to Florida, went to Denver the other day, getting close to those lobbyists.
You got
No,
your
now,
travel
wait a minute
itinerary
now.
all wrong, Conrad.
No, I got it just right. Just right. Here's a little special interest thing called the League of Conservation Voters. Babbitt used to run that outfit. League of Conservation Voters. Trial lawyers. Son of a gun. Special interest, awfully close to special interest.
That's your time, sir. And that concludes round two. Each of our panelists have asked 2 questions, and now for the third round, we begin with Perry Backus, who has his question for Conrad Burns.
Senator, you were quoted as saying the 4 laws that will bring this country down are the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and NEPA. The process to reauthorize the Endangered Species Act has begun in Congress. The act has been likened to the canary used by underground miners to warn of impending disaster. Yet many in the West fear the ramifications of the bill for traditional uses of public lands. Will you vote to reauthorize the Endangered Species Act? If not, what do we use to let us know that the canary has died?
I will vote to reauthorize the Endangered Species Act if it is the right kind of Endangered Species Act. If man is to be part of the ecosystem, I don't want man reduced to the level of the Australian kangaroo rat. I think he has a place. I'm not ready to give up property rights yet. That is the cornerstone of a free society. That's what keeps the next generation free, are those private property rights. I'm not ready to give up clean water. I'll sign a Clean Water Act. As long as we've got the right to do with that water what we want to, and we own it, if we own it. Let's face it, folks, there has to be some common sense because man is a part of this system. It has to be part of the system. If not, then we cannot survive. We cannot survive economically or socially in the state of Montana. I will sign an new Endangered Species Act if it is the right one, and the same way with Clean Water Act. But what's happening now, all of those acts are being used not for the purpose that they were designed. The spotted owl is one of the great examples of that. Also in California in the fires, guy wanted to dig a fire line but couldn't because he would disrupt some land of an Australian kangaroo rat. This is wrong. Somewhere there has to be common sense if we are to feed and clothe and shelter ourselves.
I don't think those acts will bring us down. I think they will allow us to survive in the next century if we do them right. And on this I agree. Some years ago, I was involved in one of the very first lawsuits brought in this country to make sure that under the National Environmental Policy Act, that the social and economic consequences of actions taken were part of an environmental impact statement. I think that's critical. I do support the legislation before the Congress now that the Western governors have supported, Governor Roscoe has supported, because it does 2 things. One, it does allow us to look at the economic and social consequences of any recovery plan that's intended. And secondly, it allows us to look at a broader range of species and a broader time frame within which we can look. These are acts that we have to work with and be a part of. They are part of our future. I do not think that they are something that are going to bring us down. I think that we have to build on them, work with them, and make sure that we are part of our future, because 100 years from now, we should be leaving this place a little bit better than we found it.
Our next question is from Jackie Yamanaka. It is for Jack Mudd.
Mr. Mudd, average recent retirees will have gotten back all of the money they put into Social Security with interest by the age 71. Everything above that is essentially a gift. With Americans living longer today and the baby boom generation less than 20 years from beginning to start retirement, how can this nation seek to provide benefits to baby boomers as well as future generations? Would you support higher payroll taxes to keep the system solvent? And if not, how specifically would you ensure that there is Social Security in the future?
We have a real problem in this country, not today, but 20 and 30, 40 years out. This gives me an opportunity to talk about another one of those distorted ads that's on television. I am not intending to cut anybody's Social Security. I have the endorsement of the National Committee to Protect Social Security. I have the endorsement of the National Senior Citizens Council. And for Conrad Burns to be running an ad claiming that I'm somehow going to whack the Social Security of senior citizens is both false and wrong. Now let me tell you what we're going to have to do, at least some of this, in the next century for my generation. Not the people who are on Social Security now, but the reality is that out into the next century, there are going to be too many of us, of my generation, and too few people working so that we can have exactly the same system that we have today. We know that we can't have the same system. So part of what we're going to have to do, I suspect, is people in my generation are going to have to say, are we going to be able to retire at 65? I don't think so. Are we going to get the same level of benefits across the board that people get today? I don't think so, because I don't see how you can drive Social Security taxes up broad enough for people who are in the middle income bracket, and I'm talking again about 20 and 30 years out, so that those of us can keep the same benefits we have today. We're going to have to do something different. Either we're going to have to be prepared to take smaller benefits, or we're going to have to jack the taxes up on middle-class Americans, and I think that's wrong.
I listened to that, and I still don't know what he said. Mr. Mudd is on record as supporting means testing for Social Security.
Where?
He's on record. You've already said it. It's been
Where?
in the Village Gazette. We got the quotes. You're on record. You're on record of supporting means testing. If you go to means testing, here's what happens. If you paid in, you should get it.
Absolutely.
But you're on record for means testing. If you don't, then you erode the support of the whole program, and America says that's a program that we support and we want to continue. What we've got to do is stop this government from spending money on frivolous things and stay out of the Social Security pot.
That's true.
Chuck Johnson has another question. It's for Conrad Burns.
Senator Burns, your opponent has criticized you for taking more than 60 trips paid for by lobbyists to various vacation spots around the country. Can you name any specific job or economic development that has resulted from your travels? If you're reelected, will you pledge tonight to no longer take any of these junkets? And will you join Jack Mudd in pledging never to become a congressional lobbyist once your service in the Senate is over?
Half of those trips, those bad trips. Now let's make one thing clear. There was 60. It took 103 days to make it. That's 1.7 days per trip. 1.7 days. Didn't spend one dime of the taxpayers' money. Did not miss one vote. Have the highest attendance record of the Montana delegation. Half of those trips were in telecommunications groups, both telephone, cable, television, radio broadcasters, all of those. That's pretty good evidence right there. Infrastructure. We're going to have a lot of people that's going to be using new technologies in the future because of this state in transition. People are working now. Increased jobs. increase jobs in that industry alone, because that is what I said a while ago, the new future, the new entry into the world. Our ability to participate not only in a national economy, but an international economy, the global economy, and never leave Montana, and do it environmentally safe. Half of those trips, over half of them, most of them had Montana people there, requested me to speak. So no, I always look at trips. I've turned a lot of them down, and I will turn others down, but those who I think that would support this state or promote this great state of Montana in some way or other, I will continue to take those trips. Because with this job, it may be all right for him to travel from Missoula to Washington, D.C., and that's all, and live in his cocoon, but I do not choose to do that. I'd like to be an ambassador for this state, and I think I'm a very good one.
Senator Burns, what about my question about being a lobbyist? Will you pledge not to be a lobbyist once your service is over?
I'm coming home to Montana. I'll lobby you.
And we're going to do everything in the next 15 days to make that sooner rather than later. What's wrong about this is two things. One is it's wrong to criticize an opponent as he did for taking 3 trips the last election and then to take 60. If it was wrong then, it's wrong now. Let me read you something by Ross Perot, not for sale at any price. The American people have recently watched news reports showing our members of Congress going to vacation resorts with lobbyists, with plane tickets, lodging, and meals, and all the trimmings paid for by lobbyists. These lobbyists have just one interest, to pick the taxpayer's pocket. We, the people, not special interests, own the country. And that's Ross Perot talking. The other thing that is not being said here is that these trips that were taken with the speaking fees collected over $100,000 in speaking fees. I think that's wrong. I think he should have voted to close the loophole, not to filibuster that bill.
Next question's for Jack Mudd. It's from Sherry Devlin.
Jack, you're a Catholic who, as a young person, seriously considered becoming a priest and who remains active in the church. How do you reconcile your pro-choice position on abortion rights with the Catholic Church position?
I come from a tradition which I fully embrace that says that any decision to terminate a pregnancy is both a serious medical and moral issue, and that decision can be made only for the most serious of reasons, and I believe rarely. But I do not believe that I can impose my conscience on another person by the force of law and to make a criminal out of someone who disagrees with me on a matter that is so personal, so private, and so difficult. I therefore believe, even if I disagree, which I do, with abortion, even if I disagree, the person making that decision who must follow her conscience is the woman involved, not the government imposing a decision on her conscience.
I was pro-life in 1986. I was pro-life in 1988. I am pro-life in 1994. I heard his answer. And he says that he would support taxpayer-funded abortions, and made that statement at Carroll College in Helena. How would you vote? How would you vote? That's one issue I don't think the government should even be in.
Yes.
It should not even be in it. But you always get the question asked. The only way I support abortion is in case of the health of the mother, rape, or incest. Other than that, it is a tragedy. Someone has to speak for the unborn.
And that concludes round 3. We move on now to round 4. First question is for Conrad Burns. It's from Jackie Yamanaka.
Senator, your television ad says you helped a young woman from Libby get the federal money she needed for a heart transplant. She is just one of about 140,000 Montana men, women, and children without health insurance. Now, you were quoted recently in a newspaper article saying most people who don't have insurance don't want it. Don't these uninsured Montanans deserve coverage, or do they have to turn to the state's congressional delegation when they face a health care crisis?
What we did, let's clear that up right now, because the city of Libby, we helped the city of Libby, and they should be congratulated for what they've done for Sally Sauer. The only thing we did, we cut through some red tape. We got a government that's too big, too bloated, and it will not move. And every now and again, people have to call up their senators and say, I need some help just to cut the red tape. Not to get the dollars, but just to cut the red tape. And that was the case of Sally Sauer. We were happy to do that because she was really, really in dire shape. So we did that, and we've done it for hundreds and thousands of other Montanans. Cut through the red tape. Now, let's take a look at the health care system. 85% of Americans are covered by some kind of health care insurance, HMOs, or whatever. Medicare, Medicaid. And you know what? 85% of those people are happy with their plans. You go right down the road, and I will tell you, when I went down the road in Montana, I said, okay, what do you want in a health care plan? They said, we don't want the government to run it. And we didn't want a health care plan designed after the post office. We wanted choice. We wanted the choice of doctors and pharmacies and hospitals. And if you don't get it done this year and get it right, then it's okay to wait till next year. That's what they told me. And now, what do we have to do? We have to take care of pre-existing conditions, portability, and catastrophic. Medical IRAs, administrative reform, tort reform for those of you on malpractice. We have to do that. And also, we've got to do something over in the area of allowing everybody who pays premiums should get a tax credit on those premiums. We've got to treat the individual, the independent businessman, or the farmer and rancher the same as Westinghouse or General Electric or any of those companies. It has to be, because we're talking about how to finance the system, not the delivery system.
Before taking up the health care, let me just move back to one notch. Conrad Burns just said that he believed that a woman ought to be able to make her decisions in the case of rape, incest, or the health of the mother. I think a poor woman under those situations ought not to be deprived of her decision because she doesn't have the means to pay, and that's the kind of support that I'm talking about that he is criticizing me for right now on radio ads. It's very clear that we have to have changes in our health care financing system. I don't know where Conrad Burns was when he was trying to get the deduction in the health care bill right near the end. It died, and we even lost deductibility in that. What we have to do, in my position, is we've got to have everybody in the system, not with a government-managed system, but we have to make sure that everyone is paying their fair share, not with government management, not with government taxes, but to make sure that we have guaranteed private insurance for everyone.
The next question in this round is from Chuck Johnson. It's for Jack Mudd.
Mr. Mudd, both of you have suggested that you're willing to look at places to cut the defense budget, but Malmstrom is a sacred cow. Why is that? Why should we not look at cutting that like we're cutting other bases?
You cut Malmstrom if the mission in Malmstrom is eliminated. If there's no more mission in Malmstrom, then Malmstrom will go the way of other bases whose missions are eliminated. Right now, we do have still a nuclear threat. Malmstrom is well positioned to take care of that nuclear threat. If that mission is moved, then I would be the first one to advocate looking at other missions that are legitimate missions for this country that can be carried out at Malmstrom, whether that's flying, training, any other kind of mission, because we have a very fine base with the infrastructure already there, and it makes sense for our country to use that base. I think we all want to get rid of missiles sooner or later. It's going to be later, not sooner, unfortunately, because we still have missiles pointed not at us, but in the ground and that could be pointed at us. So if the mission is eliminated, it will go into the Base Closing Act. But while we have a mission for that base, I will be the first one to fight for that mission, to make sure that that mission stays here rather than going to someplace else. We have good flying weather, we have a good base, we have a good infrastructure, and the base is very important to that community. Part of my job is not to change the mission, but to make sure that any legitimate mission that we can fly at Malmstrom or achieve at Malmstrom is done there.
Don't you think it's funny that Mr. Mudd still thinks we have a nuclear threat? And yet he doesn't believe in any kind of defenses that would knock that missile out of the air before it ever got here? Don't you find that odd? I find that very odd indeed. I think what would have happened in the Middle East had we not had the Patriot? The same kind of technology. The same kind. Yes, we still have a nuclear threat. It's in more hands than it used to be. Malmstrom will always have a mission because where it is strategically, and if as long as the world is set like it is, both in the refuelers and in Space Command, the infrastructure is there, and I shall fight for Malmstrom because I still think we live in a pretty rough neighborhood, and deterrents are still very important to this country and to this society.
Next question is from Sherry Devlin for Conrad Burns.
Conrad, last year you voted against Senate Bill 636, which prohibits violence against anyone obtaining or providing abortions or anyone involved in reproductive health services. That law specifically says that there is no prohibition on peaceful demonstrations or other conduct that's protected by the Constitution. 3 medical clinics in Montana already have been firebombed in anti-abortion protests. Your voting record, though, would seem to condone that violence. Why are you not concerned about the safety of Montana physicians, their staffs, and their patients?
First of all, the bill may have language that prohibits some of that. But there's a precedence there, Sherry. That means that labor unions probably couldn't walk picket lines. That means peaceful demonstrations.
No, the law
The
specifically
peace marches in
says
Washington.
there's no prohibition.
But I'm telling you, but once the rule writers are done with it, that may happen. I don't want to even let the nose of the camel under it. But I do not condone violence. I am not an arsonist as implied by Mr. Mudd's campaign. I think that was sort of a mean attack, and I think that's a little bit outrageous. He's talking about ours. We never called him an arsonist, and I don't contain it. That is the law of the land. That is the law of the land. Nobody in their right mind condones that. Nobody.
Why are you not willing to take legislative steps then to make this violence stop?
Because the law is already on the books. There's laws on arson right now. There's laws of blocking an interest to any establishment, any lawful legal establishment. There are laws to take care of that, and we're taking care of it now. But when you impose special rules on special things, then we get into the preference business instead of rights for all Americans.
I strongly believe in the First Amendment, contrary to the ad that Senator Burns is now running. That's what started this discussion. I strongly believe in people's right to free speech and to demonstration. What is wrong is blocking access to medical facilities, harassing patients, intimidating patients from getting legitimate medical treatment under the laws of this land. The act that was mentioned only took care of conduct. It only eliminated conduct. And for Conrad Burns to imply that because I supported that bill, I'm against the free speech part of the Constitution is wrong and irresponsible. Now, what this act does is simply to say we have a problem. People should be allowed to demonstrate and express their views, but they should not, by their conduct, block, impede, or otherwise hurt people who are getting legitimate treatment in medical clinics.
Same as I said. Same as I said.
Perry Backus now has a question for Jack Mudd.
Mr. Mudd, reading news stories has left me unsure of what stand you take on gun control. Where do you stand on that issue?
That is one issue that Conrad Burns and I agree on. I started shooting when I was 5 years old. I own guns. The first big purchase that I made as a child was a shotgun. I hunted every night after school. In Montana, we understand about guns. And as I said before, if crime were really a problem, the gun ownership in this state would indicate that we should have the highest crime rate in the nation, but we don't. The problem is with the criminals, not with the guns. I will not support additional gun regulation. There is only one person, and I know that this is going to come, so I'll say it now. There is only one person who has voted for gun control legislation on this platform, and that's Conrad Burns when he voted for the Brady bill and the Feinstein Amendment when it came through the Senate the first time. Now, he'll have a reason why that is not accurate. The vote is there, why he didn't intend it, but that's a fact. I don't support it. I've said that before. I've made it clear. I've said that I would have supported the crime bill for the same reasons that he supported it going through the first time. But I want to make something clear. There is only one person who has voted for gun control on this platform, and that's Conrad Burns when it went through the Senate. I do not support it. I have not supported it, and I've made that very clear.
I think Montanans know who does not support gun control. The Brady bill was not a part of the crime bill. Was not a part of the crime bill. The Feinstein Amendment was, when it left the Senate, costed only $23 billion, and also we done a little bit of negotiating, says the guns are going to come out in conference, but they did not. Jack, when you shoot with real bullets is on final passage, and you would have supported that, and you're on record supporting that. And you stand here and you talk about a flop. Man, you are the king of flop. I can't believe it. That you sat and look at the Montanans in the eye and say, you will not support anymore, but you would have supported a crime bill, which you said, and you asked a question of the day, said, do you think the crime bill would have done what it should be? He said, no, I don't think it would have, but I would have supported it. Why support it if it won't do what you want to do? And in there was gun control.
That concludes round 4. And we have just enough time. We were hoping to get 2 more in, but we have time for 1 more question. Is that amenable to everybody? We'd start with Conrad. Is that all right? That would be from Chuck Johnson.
Senator Burns, your campaign booklet that was included in newspapers around the state a couple of weeks ago boasts of your efforts to give women equal opportunity in the workplace and to eliminate the glass ceiling that blocks them from being promoted. You say proudly that there are 29 women on your Senate staff, yet a study by Gannett News Service in December 1993 found that you pay the women an average of $12,600 apiece less than the men on your staff. For one of the largest disparities in the Senate, are you practicing what you preach?
I think I am. We offer opportunities that in our office that probably women in the private sector do not get. And doing the same work. We also took great note of, in Mr. Mudd's law office, out of all the attorneys, only 4 women. That's all. The rest of them are clerks or secretarial services. Same was true when he was dean of the law school. I think only 2 law professors teaching there, the rest of them all men. But our disparity probably isn't any different than any other office in Washington, D.C. And I would beg to differ than anybody who ever done the figures. We have in this state 14 very capable, high-paid employees who do casework for Montana, who run these offices in each of the 8 offices in the state of Montana. So we're offering opportunity with good pay. And I don't know how the breakdown comes on women to men, but I think we're outnumbered.
Yeah, Senator, but are you offering equal pay for equal work?
Yes.
The study didn't show that.
But it's equal pay. In other words, my ledge directors, my ledge correspondents make the same male and female.
Well, Jack Mudd, I suspect that somebody was pretty defensive about that question if they went back through and checked all the records of every place that I've been involved with. Let me say something about that. First of all, in our profession that I was involved with, we had a very high percentage of women in the institution, and that was a fairly recent phenomenon. In our office, we had one of the first women partners in the state. Most of the people we've hired recently have been women, and part of that is just the change in the society. It is absolutely critical that all of us subject ourselves as congresspeople to the same laws that we pass for other folks. As far as I know, there are no senior people in Senator Burns' staff who are women. Our campaign manager is a woman. There will be senior people on our staff who are women, and I pledge that.
We'd like to take a moment, now that we've finished the round and a little bit extra, to ask all of you to give a round of applause to these 2 candidates for joining us this evening. And I'd also like this audience to thank the Billings Gazette, the Lee newspapers, this group that's been here this evening, and particularly say hello to all the viewers watching tonight around the nation on C-SPAN and around the state of Montana also on C-SPAN 1. Say hello to them. Now, as we explained at the beginning, we'll allow the 2 candidates to deliver their summations in opposite order. Jack Mudd will begin with his 5-minute summation first. Gentlemen, in departure, I'll flash your light with 30 seconds left. And we also hope that we have some decorum for their 5 minutes, and we'll again start with Jack Mudd with summation.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Lee newspapers and to everybody here. This has been, as it should be, a spirited, vigorous exchange. That's the way it should be. And that's the way I had hoped this campaign would be run from the beginning. Senator Burns, I'm going to make a request of you. Will you agree in the next 10 days to do more televised debates and to have 5 debates within the next week? I agree that I'll do it. Will you?
No.
But I know what will happen. I know what will happen in the next 30 days, next 15 days. What we will see is not Senator Burns talking to filled audiences like this with us on television, as it should be. We had 3 televised debates in the primary, a primary election, statewide. For the last 3 months, we've been trying to get Senator Burns' campaign to agree. I had a letter from his campaign manager last June saying, Conrad Burns will debate you anytime, any place. This is the kind of thing that should happen. We've done this a couple of times recently, and we've filled audiences like this. We have to make a choice here. Are we going to let incumbents hide behind slick media campaigns financed with millions of dollars, or are we going to get out and talk with the folks? I want to get out and talk with the people. And I think it's sad that we go through a campaign like this, and it is hard-fought, and it should be hard-fought, but it shouldn't be hard-fought on the media. It shouldn't be hard-fought with slick campaigns. It should be between us, so that the two of us are standing up in front of you, and the people in the television audiences can see it. I hope Montanans can see this debate on C-SPAN, because unfortunately, because of what Senator Burns just said and what his campaign has limited him to doing, no other television viewer in Montana is going to get to see a debate like this, and I think it's wrong. I've said for the last year, as I've traveled around this state, that one of the most important things that we can do for our children is to make sure that they have the best education system in the world. I have spent half of my work life in education, and I am committed to that as one of my highest priorities. My highest personal priority is to bring this country into the 21st century in education, not by imposing things from the top down from Washington, but by helping to grow ideas from the bottom up from good teachers and good school districts. I think we have got to have a 1995 Farm Bill that stands up for our producers in this state and makes sure that they have the kind of return on their investment that they need, that they can stay in business, and make sure, too, that when we put that 1995 Farm Bill together, the profits don't just go, and the structure doesn't just work to the benefit of those big corporate middlemen. We've got to stand up to that for our small producers and to make sure that they get a fair return on their investment. I oppose cuts in Medicare. That is a huge unfunded mandate to our hospitals in this state. It's unfair to our senior citizens. Conrad Burns has supported 2 pieces of legislation within the last year and one before that, each of which would have cut Medicare by over $150 billion. I think that's wrong. That's why the Committee on Social Security has endorsed me. I think that we ought to have not a government-run system, as I said, for health care. I think we need to have a private insurance system that the government stays out of, except to the extent to make sure that we are all in it, but not run the system. I say that as a provider. I say it as somebody who is interested in providing employees with benefits. I say it as a consumer. And for 10 years, I've been on hospital boards here in Montana. I don't want the government doing our health care. And I think it's time that we change our politics as usual. I think it's time, as Conrad Burns said when he was a candidate, let's get rid of the multi-million-dollar campaigns. But something happened when he became an incumbent. That is what part of what's wrong with the system. I want us to have this kind of discussion, as our governor candidates did the last time. They did almost 50 of these meetings around the state. Televised, live, that's what this should be about. If we're going to change health care, have a good farm bill, work on education for the future, we have got to get together and change politics as usual. I want to do that if you send me to Washington, and I ask for your help and your vote on November 8th.
Now it's time for a summation from Conrad Burns.
Jack, from day one in this campaign, you've questioned my integrity and my judgment. From day one. And every time I've had the occasion to pin you down on the issues, you've always come down on the liberal side. So it's no wonder you don't want to talk issues. Let's talk about, on my trips, let's talk about yours. Let's talk about your year vacation.
Oh, give me a break.
$61,000 of Montana taxpayer money, and he spent his vacation in New York.
Conrad, you know that wasn't a vacation. It's
Now, wait
been
a minute.
proven in the newspaper, and that's it.
I didn't break in on you. I'll let you finish.
I'll stop telling the truth about you if you'll stop lying about me.
I'll tell you what you got.
Stop the clock and we'll restart it so you can resume.
$61,000. Taxpayer money. While he was dean, a raise of over 50%. Lobbied the legislature for higher fees and higher taxes to do that. Went to Columbia University. I don't know how much he took there, but he got a little stipend for it. And I'll tell you what the taxpayers of Montana got. They got a paper that said, Beyond Rationalism, the place of perspective in legal education. Any of you all read it? Then he comes home, and 18 months later, he's not at that college anymore. He's in private business. That's what you got for your $61,000. I still support term limits. He does not. I support a balanced budget amendment. He does not. I support a line item veto. He does not. Let me tell you, on my whole adult life, Democrats have controlled Congress. Do you want to see what they propose now? Here's the internal memo that they're talking about on television now from Alice Rivlin. She runs OMB. Let me tell you what's in that and what Jack Mudd bought into when he went to Chicago and let President Clinton throw a fundraiser for him. He bought in tax increases of $160 million for a new VAT tax, value-added tax, $191 million for eliminating deductions for state and local taxes. In other words, you can't take your state income tax or your sales taxes off of it. $130 billion from repeal of amending the tax bracket indexing, and $100 billion from taxing employer-provided health benefits above the average plan. Spending cuts, $270 billion for a 5-year entitlement cap, allowing growth for the beneficiaries. Means testing. He will not even let you write off your interest on your mortgage payments. That's in this package. That's in this Alice Rivlin package, endorsed, I would imagine, by the President. He said this is just a draft. Folks, I'm going to tell you something about drafts, and they said that isn't our intent. Remember rangeland reform, Mr. Babbitt? He said, we're just giving you the options. What options did we have? They wanted our water. Now, I'll tell you something else about this Mr. Babbitt. And he used to run the League of Conservation Voters, who is supporting Mr. Mudd, very heavily, by the way. And here's what he says. I'm going to be the first Secretary of Interior to jerk out a major dam. He said to the Western States, with your colleague, Mr. Baucus, where he says, there's no war on the West. You want to go to Beaverhead County? There's casualties down there. There's body bags. People don't know how to plan for their life down there. Now, and he also said, cities, there's not going to be any more dams in the West. Dan Baird, director of Bureau of Reclamation, said that. And he said, if you want more water, and you're going to have more water for growth, then you're going to have to get it under existing resources. What's that tell me? That you take it away from agriculture and put it in the cities where the boats are? Do we start this class warfare? This is the man that's supporting Mr. Mudd. That's what it's all about in this thing. It's where and it's inevitable. I've got 10,500 individual contributors to this campaign in the state of Montana. I'm proud of that. I am very proud of that. And we're going to represent this state after November the 8th. Thank you very much for the lead paper.
Thank you very much, Senator Burns and Mr. Mudd. We appreciate your coming here tonight before a very lively vocal crowd. I'd also like to thank our panelists, Chuck Johnson, Sherry Devlin, Perry Backus, and Jackie Yamanaka. And, of course, I'd like to thank our moderator, Dan Dubray. Thank you for coming.